Hello, this is Tammy from Nurses and Midwives Against Bullying Australia. This evening we want to just have a look at the concept of the similarities, the stark similarities between domestic violence or domestic and family violence and in the home compared to bullying in the workplace. There are stark similarities between the two. It's inconceivable. For many years I've commented on the similarities, and I've had some people agree, some people disagree with my assumptions. However, I'm going to present to you tonight and you can work out what you think. Domestic and family violence affects the family unit, whereas bullying affects the family unit at work. Why do I say family? Nurses and midwives for decades and perhaps centuries have described themselves as a family. The nursing family, the midwifery family, the workplace family. So let's have a look at a definition of family to just examine that a little bit. I don't want to go into the nuances of what makes a family because things have changed very much over the years as to what makes a family unit, and I'm not going to get into that because that's irrelevant. What is relevant is what happens in the home and what happens in the workplace. So a definition of family from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and this sums it up quite nicely. It doesn't matter whether it's for the workplace or whether it's for the home. Family is a group of people united by certain convictions or a common affiliation. How does that sound to you? I'll read that again. Family is a group of people united by certain convictions or a common affiliation. And that certainly describes nurses and midwives, doesn't it? It certainly explains or describes the family unit as well. And certainly there are various other different definitions as well, but for the case of looking at work and domestic violence, bullying and domestic violence, then that is a perfect description of what a family is. We do get a lot of questions about why do women not leave domestic violence situations? Why do they get trapped? Why do they decide to stay? Why don't they just get out of there, for goodness sake? She knows he's bad. He knows she's bad. They know that each other is bad, or whatever it is. So that question is often bandied around a lot, and the victim is the one who's blamed and not the perpetrator. So let's have a look at some reasons behind that. One of the most common reasons, though, is that the victim, whether it's domestic violence or bullying, hopes that things will change. They hope things will improve and get better. So they stay and they stay. Then as time goes on, they end up feeling trapped and they feel that they can't get out of the domestic violence or bullying situation. Why do they feel trapped? It might be because the person in domestic violence doesn't have anywhere else to go. They don't know anywhere else to go. People have been turned against them. So they don't know what to do next. The same happens in the workplace. Does that sound familiar? Yep. Don't know where to go next, but what if I can't? And it's a continual eroding of the self-esteem and the self-confidence. Even people with a really fantastic and healthy self-image, people that have a good healthy self-esteem, people who are normally quite self-confident people, can actually lose all of that. They can become a shell of their former selves and lose any self-confidence or self-esteem to pick themselves up and be able to move. It's not as easy as you might think. I've assisted many women to get out of a domestic violence situation, but to ring a crisis line, some women will find somewhere that night and others there's nowhere to put them. So where do they go? They've had their families or whoever turned against them, etc. So I'll get into more of this in a bit detail a little bit later. The victim, whether it's domestic violence or whether it's workplace bullying, can suffer some social and economic difficulties as well. So like we were just suggesting, social situations like, oh, I was born in this place, it's the only place that I know. Or it might be, I don't know where to go, or I don't have anyone to go to. It could be that you're in an isolated community, remote or rural, and then instead of being able to stay in your actual town, you might end up in maybe a metropolitan area because that's the only place a domestic violence service can put you, and people don't feel confident doing that. It could also be that they've been threatened that I don't care where you go, I'm going to find you, I'm going to hunt you down. Well, no matter where you go, I'm going to find you. And the victim believes that. And that can happen in the workplace as well. I don't care where you go. I don't care what hospital you go to. I know people in a lot of places. You know, I will make sure that you don't get a good reference. Economically as well, because it is difficult. If you're a single parent moving out with children, that costs an enormous amount of money. And to have to suddenly lose your job, move somewhere to be safe and not be able to pick up another job because you emotionally can't return to the workplace, or it's difficult to get a job in the next place that you go to, is very difficult. And to have to rely on, say, Centrelink benefits with your children while you're in a hostel or living in someone else's home in another area is extremely difficult. Imagine someone in the workplace. Why aren't they leaving the abusive workplace? Perhaps they're going to choose another occupation within nursing and midwifery, but it doesn't pay as well. Or maybe now they have to go to a Monday to Friday job. They're losing their penalty rates, and it was the penalty rates that was helping keep their head above water before. It could be any number of economic reasons. They own the house that they're in, but now there's going to be a bit of divorce settlement. Or they're in the workplace and they own their own home, but once they flee, they're going to have to live in hostels or rent somewhere else, and there's a whole heap of new costs to be involved. And if you're in a domestic and family violence situation, you might have the cost of lawyers and all of these other people. And if you're in the workplace, it might be the cost of solicitors and stuff to help also to fight the bullying situation in the workplace. So there are lots of issues. There's also shame, there's also guilt, there's also, you know, a lot of other things that affect people as well. The bullying victim, the domestic violence victim can also feel very, very consumed by the whole situation, and that weakens them so badly that their flight or fight response is diminished as well. So that over time their adrenaline has been so high all the time, their cortisol levels have been so high all the time. But that's very fatiguing. So that once stress hormone levels are very high for a long time, you can get medical conditions from that and so on. I won't go into that. I could name them, but that's not the purpose of this. But once those stress hormones have been high for a long time, sometimes that flight and fight response can actually be diminished, and people are so absorbed in the situation that they just can't get out, even though they want to and even though they've tried. Like domestic violence has been poorly recognised over the centuries, so too is bullying. Trust me, the two of them are so similar in so many ways, including the fact that it's under-recognised, it's poorly reported. People really don't understand about what domestic violence and bullying are. People don't know necessarily where to get the help. I've worked with many, both men and women who haven't known where to get help with domestic violence, and that there are services out there to help. Victims of bullying don't know where to go and get help, or if they can get help. So people who have sought assistance with domestic violence have been to the police and other authorities and other organisations a gazillion times, and they've not been believed. The same as bullying victims. They go to the workplace, they go to their union, they go to various other places. No one's believing them, or no one's helping them. And the legislation for both domestic violence and for bullying is extremely poor. It is improving, however, for domestic violence at the moment, but not for bullying. There is a lot of inaction for both of them. They get swept under the carpet. It's often the individual has to fight alone, and the individual can't fight alone. So this is some of the similarities so far. In both situations, there is constant criticism, constant put-downs, constant humiliation, embarrassment. There's all these things that happen. And it's all an endeavour to weaken the victim, whether it's in the home or the workplace. Constant criticisms, put-downs. It is really, really common. The two of them are so similar in that there is a fear factor. Fear is an amazing thing for human beings. Fear causes us to either, as we said, fight or flight. And most human beings will flight. We'll fight to a degree, but then we'll flight, we'll run. So we really do need to consider the victims in these situations. There is so much control in both situations. It is just unbearable. It is a control factor. It is about an imbalance of power, where one person has more power than the other. And even in the workplace, if there's meant to be that imbalance of power because it's a manager and a subordinate, and I hate the word subordinate because that's what a lot of managers think, you are my subordinate. That is a terrible, terrible word. So you're a member of the team and your manager, yes, there's always going to be an imbalance of power, but they abuse their power. And in some families, one partner in the family decides that they are going to abuse power and they take on more power than they're entitled to as well. So there is an imbalance of power in both of these situations. The victim in both feels very powerless. They don't know what to do. They feel that they can't stand up anymore. They've tried. They've been knocked down. There's yelling. There's shouting. There can be false accusations, or something that happens can be so embellished it's ridiculous. And that happens in both the home and the workplace as well. False accusations, you're lazy, you're no good, you're incompetent. So all of these things, or you did such and such a thing. It could be that your partner is going off at you because you dropped a few drops of milk on the floor or the kitchen bench, but the way they've reacted, it's like you've dropped 3 litres and you've done it on purpose. And the same thing in the workplace, where you can be falsely accused, it didn't happen at all, or it's been embellished to such an extent that there's now this amazing story about what a terrible, terrible nurse or midwife you are. And in fact, either it didn't happen or there's only a tiny grain of truth. They'll hang you out to dry for anything. So finances, we've already discussed, is a major issue, but it can be withholding finances, such as not giving you the equipment or the necessary items that you need at work. It can be failing to give you time off in lieu. It can be failing to give you overtime. They don't care. It's just another way of bullying you by not giving you what you're worth and making you feel worth less. It could be that the partner in the home is not giving money to, or adequate money, either way, of purchasing what might be needed in the family home. I know one woman who was only given like such a small amount every week for food, for medication, for things for the children, for everything. It was such a pitiful amount. No one could have survived on it on their own, let alone this mother and her 3 children. They cause you to question your own judgment. They cause you to feel like your perception of what is happening is not true. So they undermine your perception of reality. This happens in the domestic violence situation. It's called gaslighting, and it happens just as equally in the workplace environment too. I heard a story just yesterday about a worker who would go and hide the laptop on this particular nurse or midwife. Then they would do something else. So they would just keep interfering all the time, so that this nurse or midwife was at the point of wondering what the hell is going on. The thing is the same in the home, where the husband might turn the lights off and the wife says, I had the lights on. He says, no, they were off. I've just turned them on, or whatever. It could be that you put something in a certain place, but suddenly it's been moved. It could be so many different things. It's just so that whatever your perception is, it's the opposite. I turned it on. No, you turned it off. Or you left the oven on. No, I definitely turned it off. No, you left it on. It's just an argument about it doesn't matter what it is, just trying to skew your perception. Whatever it is that you think you've said or done, the opposite is being said. It's called gaslighting, and it's very, very damaging. Happens in both. They also want to convince others that there is something wrong with you, and they can use these gaslighting things and many other things to cause people to think there's actually something wrong with you. In the domestic and family violence situation, that's usually done to your own family, where your own family is turned against you because the perpetrator has turned on you, has gone to all these other people, convincing them there's something wrong with you. When really there's nothing wrong with you, it's something wrong with them. But that's typically how narcissists play things out, and it happens in the workplace too. In both situations, it's called flying monkeys. Flying monkeys are people who are deliberately pulled in to help the bully, because bullies rarely act alone. Flying monkeys are usually, but not always, unsuspecting people. It could be that the bully sounds so concerned about you and, oh, come back and let me know how Tammy is, let us know what's happening. And they're reporting back all of this stuff. And they think they're helping me, but indeed they're feeding the bully. Bullies rarely act alone. Domestic violence, the narcissist rarely acts alone either. But the unsuspecting flying monkeys are dragged in and used and turned against you, so that in the end you have no support network left. Your friends are turned against you, your family's turned against you. In the workplace it's your colleagues, in the workplace it's your family, because they're your family. So bullies rarely act alone. Narcissists rarely act alone. They have their flying monkeys. Sometimes flying monkeys are deliberately recruited. Someone that they've turned against you already, or who already has a I'm not sure about her kind of thing. So very, very common. Some of the lesser known things are physical violence and sexual violence. I have recently spoken to nurses and midwives, quite a few of them, who have been physically assaulted in the workplace, from being spat in their faces to being slapped, pinned against a wall, attempting to choke them, tripping them over, and various other things. So physical assault. I recently spoke to a nurse a few months ago. I was asked to give her a call because of her mental state. She was suicidal. She had been bullied by a particular employee for quite some time, and the workplace would not believe her. She outlined various things which were very classically bullying situations. The serious thing about it was that this person had been sexually harassing her in the workplace. This person, however, actually sexually assaulted her, raped her repeatedly, told her she could go, and as soon as she started to get up off of the area where this act was happening, he immediately got up, grabbed her, threw her back down, and then repeated. So don't think sexual abuse doesn't happen in workplace bullying. It clearly does. So there are many, many things that we've discussed tonight, but another thing on top of that is social isolation. We've kind of discussed that in the workplace, and also in the domestic and family violence situation, where you can't get away. You feel trapped in a town because you always grew up there, or it's in a rural, remote area. There are other ways to isolate people too. So it could be in the domestic violence situation that the victim isn't allowed to go out with their friends or to call their family. They're not allowed to have a Facebook page, or if they do, it has to be with the partner. In the workplace, social isolation can be not inviting that person to any of the social events, always rostering them onto duty when there is a social event on. It could be things like working out who your friends are, because who do you mostly go to lunch with, or who do you arrive at work with, who do you leave work with, and then starting to isolate you from them. Instead of rostering you both on the same shifts, they start to roster you on separate shifts. Or if they see you both sticking up for the same thing, making sure that you're not on the same shift at all, making sure that your days off clash so that you can never catch up with each other. It could be sending you to another ward area altogether. You normally work in ED, but you've been sent off to work in the medical unit. You now are away from your support network. You're away from your colleagues that you know. You're away from your friends. You're away from your clinical skill set. It's quite different in an ED than it is in an acute medical area. So these are all various ways of isolating you in the workplace and in the home, but there are multiple examples and I just can't go into all of them. So it could be over auditing your notes more than they would audit another nurse or midwife. It could be checking your emails, checking your SMSs. It could be 1,001 things. There's also things like, so there's a lot of technological abuse both in the workplace and in the home environment. We've already mentioned some of those, like emails and texting and Facebook pages that have to be together, having to know your PIN numbers and whatever. This also happens in the workplace, but another thing that happens in both domestic violence situations and work situations is GPS tracking. There could be GPS tracking on your vehicle if you use a work vehicle to get around places, but it's also they're using GPS systems within the acute hospital system these days as well. so that they know when you've left the ward unit, they know you've gone down to x-ray, they know you've come back to the ward, they know you've gone to the toilet, and they can tell how long you were in the toilet for. They see that you have been into the tea room and you've done 5 minutes extra at lunchtime, so they use that to penalise you. They forget that you did half an hour's overtime yesterday that they didn't pay you for, that they knew it was done, but they really don't care. They're using and abusing you, but the minute you take that extra 5 minutes, the GPS tracking is letting them know. So all of these things, so just keep an eye on all of those things in the workplace, but also in the home. There can also be spiritual violence that happens where a partner makes you worship or not worship a particular religion. And it could be in the workplace where you like to go to church every Sunday, but every Sunday you're rostered to do an early shift and you can't go to church. It might be that you want to go to Ramadan, but every year you get no opportunity to go to Ramadan. It could be you're Indigenous and you want to go to NAIDOC, but you find out you're being rostered on in NAIDOC. Though thankfully for NAIDOC, most awards do have some kind of cover so that you can go to that kind of celebration. But you know, there's all kinds of ways to do these things spiritually as well, or to block you out because you're a certain religion or you have a certain spiritual way of thinking. So these are just some of the ways that there is a lot of similarities in domestic and family violence, and also in the workplace. There is another section I want to look at that is called coercive control. Now, in some states and in some countries, coercive control has been legislated as a crime. So in the domestic and family violence situation, when coercive control is used, it is a criminal offence in many states, territories, and also in many countries. What is coercive control? Well, it's all the things we've just mentioned. So there's a pattern of behaviour, and that pattern of behaviour could be one thing. It could be multiple things altogether, but there's a pattern to the behaviour. So it could include things like verbal abuse, which we've discussed, put downs, humiliation, shame, and all those sort of things. It can be many, many things. I'm sure I don't have to go into a lot of detail. Economic abuse that we've discussed too, not being allowed money or being restricted money, or having every single cent that you spend being looked at. It could be the loss of finances because you now have to leave, or you know, you've been downgraded in your work, or whatever it is, but whether it's family or whether it's work family. Psychological abuse, we've discussed that, many kinds of psychological abuse. There's gaslighting, there's so many different types, and I could go on with all the various names of things. There's sexual abuse, we've discussed that, and we really don't need to go into that again. There could be, or may not, there may or may not be physical abuse in all of this as well. But quite often coercive control is considered everything that's non-physical, but physical can certainly come into that. There's that gradual isolation that we talked about in the domestic and family situation, and also that isolation in the workplace. And there's many different forms of that too, not only the things that I've suggested this evening. The degrading put downs, the humiliation, the threats, the constant surveillance, whether it's in the family or in the workplace. And one that I think that is really important looking at is micromanagement. So in the home, that's the partner really watching you. There are very, very, very strict rules, and those rules might even change. Like what you wear, who you see, what time dinner has to be on, you know, how much noise there is, what time kids have to be in bed, or if you can go to the shops or not. And the same thing happens in the workplace too. Micromanagement is a major thing in nursing and midwifery, where there are very, very strict rules, and you might think you know the rules and then suddenly the rules change. It could be that your manager is just watching every single little thing you do and commenting on every single little thing. Micromanagement, it's very... well, it takes away your autonomy, it takes away your freedom. It's very restricting. I guess that's the word that I was looking for. So both in the workplace and the home. And I've just got something here on the internet that I'd like to read you about what is coercive control. So coercive control is a type of abuse. Now this is written for domestic and family violence sufferers, but I'm going to try as I read it to interpret that into the workplace. So I'll take out the words family as much as I can and just put it into the workplace and see what you think. So coercive control is a type of domestic abuse, and I'm going to say domestic abuse here because we've just said that the workplace is basically your family as well. But coercive control is a type of abuse that can be harder to identify than some other types of abuse. It refers to a pattern of behaviours used by an abuser to control the victim and create an uneven power dynamic. Coercive control generally involves manipulation and intimidation to make a victim scared, isolated, and dependent on the abuser. You may have heard this term in the news and media a lot recently. This is because there has been a push to make coercive control illegal under reforms to domestic violence laws across Australia. I will skip that bit. Then, examples of coercive control. So these are just some of the ways, and like I've said, it's just some of the ways as well. So isolating from friends and family. A controlling person or abuser may try to get their partner to reduce or cut contact with their support network. Keeping them away from family and friends can make the victim easier to control. The abuser might try to prevent them from going to social events or being alone with their support network in case they talk about issues while the abuser isn't around. The abuser may also prevent them from going to work or school. Now that's in the domestic violence situation, but it could be preventing them going to CPD in the workplace. It could be preventing them going to workplace gatherings, etc. Team building exercises or an evening down at the pub. Monitoring activity. This might involve wanting to know where the victim is and who they're with at all times, or calling and texting excessively when the victim is not with that abuser. It also includes reading emails, texts and social media messages without the victim's permission. It could also be forcing them to hand over their PIN number or their password. Extreme cases may involve placing cameras or recording devices in the victim's home or car, or tracking them with GPS and spy software. This is also considered stalking and harassment. Restricting autonomy. The abuser's main goal is to take the victim's freedom and independence away from them. And as nurses and midwives, we value that so much. As human beings, we value that so much. They might do this by removing or restricting the victim's access to a vehicle or public transport. So it might be that you find it harder and harder to book a car at work if you actually use a car at work. Hiding their devices, such as the nurse who had her laptop hidden, or changing passwords on devices, online accounts, etc. Controlling the body. So this one is more about controlling in the family situation, where they have to wear certain clothes, eat and drink certain foods, how they groom or present themselves or whatever. It might be about how tired they look because they're not getting enough sleep and that sort of thing. But bodies are also controlled in the workplace too. Maybe everyone else is allowed to wear the work t-shirt, but you have to wear the corporate uniform. So you're being treated differently. Or someone is always allowed to wear the piece of jewellery that they wear, but as soon as you do the same thing, you're not allowed to do that. So it could be perhaps you were a shift worker and you found it easy to make appointments to see a doctor or another therapist, and now you can't do that because they've put you on Monday to Friday work because they want to monitor you very closely, and those hours therefore prevent you going to see the person, the doctor, the therapist that you wanted to see, and work are not giving you the time off to do that. So things like that. Degradation. The abuser will aim to damage the victim's self-esteem in order to gain control over them and prevent them from leaving the relationship, but that might be preventing you leaving the workplace because they've made it so hard for you to go anywhere else and they've threatened you that you won't get a good reference, etc. Abusers might call their victims names, insult them, constantly criticise how they do things, bully and belittle them, and they might also put them down in front of others, but pass it off as only joking. Over time, even small jabs will eat away at the victim's self-worth. Financial control. Coercive control can involve financial abuse where the abuser withholds or limits access to money. They might provide the victim with an allowance and or control how much money they can spend. And this can also happen in the workplace. I'm sure that you can expand your knowledge to that. Limiting the victim's access to money can make it even harder for them to leave the relationship. They may feel financially dependent. So this is quite common in the workplace. Your wages are dropping or you've got to go somewhere else and not work for a while. So jealousy and possessiveness, it's very common. Nurses and midwives, women, jealousy, it's a terrible thing. Jealousy is just awful and it destroys relationships. It doesn't matter whether it's in the home or whether it's in the workplace. So, you know, it might be jealousy that you get on with a particular employee, or it could be that you were at the pub dinner and they've just decided to accuse you of sidling up to their partner, and that you were flirting with them and you weren't, and you yeah, you might have spoken to the person for a couple of minutes, but there was nothing involved in it. It could be jealous of your skills. They could be jealous of how patients really warm to you. So the jealousy could be for any number of reasons. Threats and intimidation for your safety, for anything, threatening you with your job, threatening you with so many things, demotion, or the list goes on. It's non-exhaustive. But the abuser will use threats or intimidation to scare the victim into doing what the abuser wants. Now that has been taken from Relationships Australia, Queensland. So that was really helpful information. Are you seeing the similarities between domestic violence, domestic and family violence, and workplace bullying? It's astounding. It is just so common. And if coercive control is a crime in a domestic and family violence situation, why is it not a crime in the workplace? Nurses and midwives are 4 times more likely to die from suicide than the general population. And I've just heard recently of a couple of people who have suicided due to bullying. If you're at the point that you need assistance, I would encourage you, please go and get that help. And before I do, and before I forget, a lot of people say, oh, thank goodness there's no children involved in bullying like there is in domestic and family violence. Isn't there? Are there no children involved in bullying? If you're being bullied in the workplace, then yes, there are most likely children involved. The majority of people have got some degree of contact with children, whether it's their own children in the home environment, or whether it's grandchildren, nieces and nephews, maybe you're a carer for children through child safety or an informal matter. Maybe you babysit children. So children are often involved, and when it's workplace and family violence, or workplace bullying, whichever one you want to call it, then children are vicariously traumatized as a result of it. They're watching their parents suffer. They're watching their grandparents suffer. They're watching the changes in emotional and mental health, their psychological health being destroyed. They're suffering because their parent has now lost a job due to bullying, or can't work, or they're being falsely reported to APRA or someone else, and that's a tool for bullying. So yes, children are involved in the workplace bullying just as much as they are in domestic and family violence. They could be affected too because their parent isn't earning money now, and so they can't have the same liberties that they used to have, or their parents just simply can't afford that new pair of shoes that they need for school because they don't have that money coming in. So I don't ever want to hear that children are not victims of workplace bullying. They are, quite clearly. And certainly they are in a domestic and family violence situation. We know that. And we know that many nurses and midwives have been brought up in homes where they suffered domestic and family violence as a child. They may be suffering domestic and family violence now, and they're suffering domestic and family violence in the workplace because it's called workplace bullying. We can't underestimate the damage that has on people. So I want you to consider all of that. And if you're suffering in a domestic and family violence situation, and you're suffering violence in the workplace, workplace bullying, you are copying all of this extra stress and strain 24/7. That's an enormous amount of stress to carry around as a burden. As I said before, if you're suffering from any of these things, I encourage you to please go and get some help. It's not weak to ask for help. In fact, it's really hard to ask for help. Please reach out. There's 1800 811 811. That's 1800 811 811. That's actually called Women's Line. However, men, if you call that number too, then they will direct you to Men's Line, and they'll give you the number for that, or you can Google it. If you're feeling suicidal at all, please reach out immediately for help, because you're worth it. You're worth more than anything you can believe. So there's a suicide callback service. And then there are other typical numbers like Beyond Blue, Lifeline. There's your local GP. There may be friends or colleagues in the workplace that you feel that you can trust. I would try to keep it outside of work. go and see your GP, talk to friends, talk to family, find anyone that you can go and talk to if you're struggling or you're having any concerns. And if you're in the workplace, family, I don't care where you are, document everything. Write down every single thing that you possibly can. There is a lot of help out there for victims of domestic and family violence, and there is a lot of help out there for people who are suffering bullying in the workplace. I have many people saying their workplace doesn't care, their union doesn't care, other professional organisations don't care. At Nurses and Midwives Against Bullying Australia, we do care. We do have a Facebook page that you can join. We do ask you whether you're a nurse or a student nurse, are you a midwife or a registered midwife? We do ask you for your APRA number because we want to know that it's only nurses and midwives that we're admitting to the page. So your APRA number is available on the internet to anyone 24/7 around the world. Anyone can search you on that site, your name, your area, your registration number, the lot. So search it yourself first. If you provide it to us, it's only so that we can prove that you are a nurse or midwife. We do not keep any details. We do not record anything. We simply look at the number, go, yep, this person is legitimate, and we allow you entry into the group. If we have any concerns about bullying on the page, we will immediately get rid of anyone bullying. So I do encourage you, please seek help. We do recognise that this is a very serious and a very major issue. We are on your side. We are simply nurses and midwives that are wanting to educate, lobby, and to support people as much as we possibly can. We are not a counselling service. We are not a legal service. We are not a union. We are here just to support our colleagues. So I just want to wish you and bid you all well, and hope that we can at least in somehow make a small impact in anybody's life. Please reach out, seek out for help. You are being heard. There are people who do understand. All the best.